All right, Jim, our next question sent via the Cult of Cornette Facebook group was sent by Tony Kearns. I posed this question to the...
You think he's just changing his name a little bit there to avoid detection?
I posed this question to the cult a little while back, but I wanted Jim's opinion. Does Jim look at Seth Rollins the way he did Triple H? In that Rollins is not the guy, but the one who works with the guy? So the question is, how do you see Seth Rollins?
You know, that might be the case, but I don't know that it's pronounced as much now as it was then, because you had, at the time, 4 or 5 really megastars. Austin, Rock, Taker, Foley could fit in there at that point, at that level, over that, 3 or 4 or 5 year period. And Triple H was right there with all of them, but he was never, and this is maybe, what the revisionist history has done for us with all of the, footage that's been replayed of all his victories and championship wins and etc. But at the time, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but from 1998 to 2003 or 4, or whatever it was, Triple H was in a lot of those main events and a lot of that picture, but he was never seen as a box office draw at the level of an Austin or a Rock or a Taker or a Foley or maybe 1 or 2 people in that rarefied air. Even a Kane at one point. It just wasn't comparable to the gates, the crowds, the ratings, the whatever that those other guys had done. Or am I misremembering this?
No, I mean, I don't think you can compare anyone to Austin or The Rock. And The Rock may be the closest comparison just because they both kind of came up at the exact same time. But Austin, and I'd say The Rock, those two on top really changed the business. Undertaker and Mankind were a big part of that main event mix, but I think Triple H benefited from that, from everything getting built up the way it did, more than any of them did.
Well, yeah, and also the guy that works with the guy that draws the money is an important spot, because the one key thing is that he was able to work with all those guys. You want a guy that can have a good match and do shit with all of those stars, and he did that. But so there's no shame at that level necessarily in being the guy that worked with the guy that drew the money. But I always saw him at that point. And then in the mid 2000s, when I quit watching and he and Stephanie were even closer and he was a member of the family, I know he was beating everybody and his brother. I don't know or care about that point, but they didn't have any bigger stars at that particular time. They did in that Attitude Era and shortly after.
And when you started watching Seth Rollins or working with him specifically in Ring of Honor, what did you think his limit was? Where did you think he'd go?
Well, I go back to watching him and Davey Richards that night in Toronto and thinking this is a modern Flair and Steamboat kind of thing, because they're so athletic and they're hitting hard in safe places. They weren't doing crazy shit, but it was definitely impactful. I said, this is a modern version of that, and they're being athletic, but there's entertainment in it. I think Seth, and it's been 16, 17 years or whatever. So he's slowed down now in terms of just doing crazy shit that he did. I don't even mean crazy. They weren't going through 15 tables, but just 40 minutes all out athletic shit. He's picking his spots now. He's learned to slow down and sell. He's a more professional all around performer now. But I always thought that he was going to be a top guy, because not only did he have the size and the good looks, but he had the ability in the ring. And we were just starting to see a point where maybe whether he could cut a promo or not, because he still had a bit of the whiny voice. And so I was disappointed when as I've told the story, when he left and took the deal in NXT when we were just getting started with the Sinclair version of Ring of Honor, because I wanted to work with him longer. But I was happy to have helped advise and or delay him from signing an offer that TNA gave him. It was just bogus horse shit, so that he would be not tied up when NXT called, which they did shortly thereafter. So, and that was the same time as Chris Hero and Claudio went to NXT, and they were my favorite heel tag team in Ring of Honor. And I knew what was going to happen. They were going to like Claudio because of his physique. They weren't going to like Chris because of his physique. They didn't realize that Chris had taught Claudio most of what he knew, and they were both better off together as a tag team because they were tremendous that way. So they pushed Claudio, they buried Chris, they ran him off, and then Claudio never really made it to the upper echelon, but now he's stuck over in La La Land. So there you go. What were we talking about?
Seth Rollins.
Well, I'm done.